Hey guys, it's Connor, and today we're doing another cinematography breakdown of one of my own music videos where I walk you through exactly the lighting setups, the lenses, and all that kind of stuff. I found these kinds of things really helpful when I was starting out, so hopefully they can help you as well. The video that we're going to go over today is the song Metamorphosis by the band Exterminatus. They're friends of mine, and I want to start by going over the notes that they gave me, because I think it's really important that you also learn to take what a client is asking of you and translating that into a concept, something a lot more tangible. And I think that process is also important to learn as well. They had sent me over the song as well as a bunch of notes with lyrics and notes about what the album is about, because this one's a concept album, which you don't get too often. And the concept is essentially a sci-fi what-if scenario about what happens to humanity in the future. So right off the bat, I wanted to do something that at least looked, or at least felt, somewhat futuristic to begin with. It was going to be strictly a performance video. There's no storyline or B-roll mixed in with that whatsoever. And they were on a pretty tight budget, so we wanted to make sure we could pull off the futuristic vibe on that strict budget. So this is the treatment, the pitch I gave the band, and I basically settled on two really simple, straightforward things. One is I wanted an all-white room where I could do a few different setups to add some variety to it. Because I feel like the white walls is a very clinical sci-fi thing that we're used to from Hollywood movies like The Arrival and Ex Machina and stuff like that. So I wanted an all-white room, and I also wanted to use some Quasar Science LED tubes, because those are the most futuristic lighting you could possibly get, and they're dirt cheap to rent. So we couldn't really afford to do some crazy sci-fi effects or sets or anything like that, but that's a great way to get a sci-fi feel on a budget. So here I've just sketched out the setups I want to do and vaguely what the shots are going to look like, purely for communicating with the band and getting their general approval on the process. And you'll see later on what those shots ended up turning out to be and just how close they were to the actual treatment. So the first setup is the full band setup. And it's essentially a wide shot, and we're framed into the corner of the room to kind of add some physical depth to the shot. And then I arranged the band to also create some spatial depth as well. I make sure the vocalist is right up front, then we have a row of the three instrumentalists, and then at the back we have the drummer. So we've got kind of this diamond-shaped setup that helps create space and depth. The majority of the lighting here, as you can see, is these Quasar Science LED tubes, and they're all just done behind the band. And what I wanted for lighting was that it's kind of lighting them from behind, outlining them, giving them a nice sort of ring light around them. But I also wanted to light the sides of their face while keeping the front a little bit dark. It's just a little more moody and ominous, and I love lighting the sides of the face because it gives this nice texture. It pulls out all the pores in the skin and all that kind of stuff. It's just really gritty, and I really like that look. Now over to the right hand side, I added one other light, which is a large softbox that I just used just to bring up the ambient light levels, bring up more detail in the shadows a little bit. And by having the lighting a little bit stronger on one side, I just felt like the overall lighting setup looked a little more dynamic that way. As you can see in the photos, all the lighting is actually daylight balanced lights, and the blue effect was actually done by shifting my white balance in camera, and then I just enhanced that further in the color grade by saturating it a little bit more. Now the way I mounted these Quasar tubes was a little bit different. A couple of the smaller 2-foot ones are just taped to the wall because it just worked, and I have no issues seeing tape on a wall personally. And the larger 4-foot ones, we didn't have any specialized lighting stands or clamps for them, and I didn't want to go through the process of figuring all that out. So I just took mic stands that you would use for a vocal mic and set them up properly and put a couple zip ties on them. So that made the height adjustable. I could adjust the angle and all that kind of stuff. So if you don't want to buy all these specialized clamps, which can get expensive, just buy a mic stand. They're like 15-20 bucks, and honestly I've used them for lights for a long time, Quasars and otherwise, and they're a really good option. The last thing we did for this setup is we brought in a haze machine. It just made the lighting a little more volumetric, and again it added to that dynamic sense of depth, because if you look at the difference between the vocalist, who's right up front, and the drummer, who's way in the back, the drummer is a lot more washed out. Those shadows are brought a little bit up, and that difference in contrast from the front to the back of the image just helped add a dynamic. I'm always trying to make the images as dynamic and full-bodied as possible. So things like spatial depth and haze and all these kinds of things really lend themselves to creating that big polished image. I'm using a Sony a6500 for basically everything I do, including this video, and for the wide shots I had it on a glide cam, and I was using a Contax 28mm 2.8 I believe. And I love these Contax Zeiss lenses. They're just old vintage like manual lenses. I've got a lot of them and I'm very, very happy with them. They're super sharp, they flare really nicely. I just have no complaints whatsoever. We did a few passes with the glide cam and then I switched to going handheld. And when I went handheld, I switched to the Contax 50mm and all of that is shot wide open at f1.4. And I've weighed down the rig a little bit. It's not just the camera and the lens. I find that handheld doesn't look great that way, even with in-body stabilization. So I try and weigh the rig down a little bit. So having an external monitor helps just for, you know, using a monitor, but it also helps add to that weight and make it not so jittery. It's a much more smooth and natural movement. And I've also got a camera cage with a top handle on it. I'm also using an external battery. So if you're trying to go handheld, I really recommend building up a rig. It has a much more professional look because, you know, when you see handheld movement on a film set, they're not going handheld with something that weighs just a couple pounds. They're going handheld with giant RED cameras. And I think, you know, the weight of a RED or an Alexa or, you know, whatever they're using at the time, that weight really smooths out the movement a lot. I went with the 50 just because I love the compression of that lens, and it's a perfect focal length for anything. It's really strange how much use I get out of it, but I love it, and it also flares so nicely and so beautifully, and I kind of wanted to get those gorgeous horizontal blue sci-fi J.J. Abrams lens flares in it, and it really, really worked well. Before we went to our second setup, I got everybody out of there except for the drummer so I could get some nice close-ups of him. So I did handheld close-ups with the 50mm from each side so I can get each side of the kit, because very technical music, so I wanted to make sure that at any given moment I had a camera that was focused on exactly what he was doing. So if he's doing some crazy fill across the kit, I can follow him from left to right, no problem. We rounded out the setup by doing some glide cam work on the drums, and it's actually crooked for a few passes. You'll see a few shots in the video where I pass by pretty quickly crooked on the glide cam, and I really like the look that gave. It matched the intensity and the technicality of what he was doing at the time. There's a few shots in this video actually that are crooked, and that being one of them, and the other one being during the breakdown section. When that hits, we get a lot crazier with the handheld movement. It's a lot more intense, and I wanted to do the same with the glide cam shots so that I could cut between them and it would still have that same energetic, chaotic feel. And so when the breakdown hits, I'm kind of letting the glide cam wobble back and forth as I pass by, and I really like the effect of it. It just added to the chaotic nature of it and the sudden shift in the music that, you know, kind of throws off the listener. Something as simple as just letting the glide cam swing and getting some Dutch angles in there really changed the feel of the video, even though none of the lighting changed, none of the setups changed. That's the only thing that changed during that moment, and yet the feel is so clearly something completely different. So the second setup is off in this little alcove or hallway off to the side, and I wanted to add some color contrast to the video and not make the whole thing blue. So for this, we've got the quasars from daylight over to a much warmer color temperature, but we're also keeping it the same as far as the white balance goes. So I've got the softbox up to the left hand side and above the talent, and that's still shining on them blue. And so it's still got that blue tint for continuity, but I wanted a little bit of contrast, and blue and orange go really nicely together. The lighting is still similar, with us trying to light the subjects from behind to outline them and the sides of their face, and this is much more drastic, I think, in this shot, especially with the color contrast going on. But it's the same kind of approach to the lighting. We've just got them vertical now, we've got different colors. We do have one small light behind them, essentially on the ground pointed up, and that's just helping with a little bit more outline to pop them off of that sort of black abyss behind them. And we pumped even more haze into the shot for this one, again, just to add some depth and not just have plain black background behind them. It just adds a little more interest, and it adds a nice glow around a lot of lights. You can see kind of this nice glow around the quasars on this one too, which I really like. Again, everything here is with the 50mm 1.4, all handheld obviously. And yeah, it's just a look I really like, and I think this shot turned out well. This last setup is just the vocalist performing. Nobody else was filmed here, and we've just got him in front of a couple quasar tubes. Just I wanted this purely silhouette. I don't want to see any detail on his face or anything like that to kind of bring out the emotion in the performance in a strange way by hiding his face more. But I really like this one. We crushed the blacks a lot more during the color grade and removed the washed out, like low contrast look from the haze. Again, handheld, 50mm 1.4, really straightforward. And yeah, we've still got the lights on those mic stands, and we've just got one positioned right behind the other. Because we were shooting in a white room and light just reflects around like crazy, we backed him off of any reflective walls as much as possible. We put him in the dead center of the room, basically, so that we weren't getting any bounce. So it kind of gave us the effect of being in a really dark room, and then after going to the color grade and crushing those shadows even more, then it just looks like he's in a pitch black room and those are the only two lights. When we got to the color grade, there really wasn't much that I did. It was a lot of cleanup and detail work. So just balancing the shots, making sure they're consistent in contrast and exposure all the way across. And I did a little bit of work on the skin tones and those quasar lights. The Sony cameras have a weird issue where with really saturated blues, sometimes they'll change it to be tinted green, and it's really odd, but it was just this thin line all the way around those quasars that would show up green, and then the rest was all blue. So I had to go in, mask that out in Premiere Pro, and just switch it over to blue again. So that was one little cleanup I had to do. And then to make sure that everybody didn't look like the Blue Man Group, I took all their skin tones and made them a little bit more natural. They're still very kind of blue, but they were just flat out blue human beings before I started. So we wanted it to look natural in the sense that it looked like natural skin tones that had blue light on them, rather than just blue skin tones, if that makes sense. It's a delicate balance. But again, all I did was mask out the skin tones there, and I just adjusted them back to a little bit more natural look, adding a little bit more orange and pink in there, just to kind of look more balanced. That's all there is to this video. It was a really straightforward performance video, but I think it's important to take something like this and look at the basics, strip it down to just the lighting and the choice of lenses and things like that. Look at why all of this stuff happens to get a better understanding of how you can apply it to your own music videos. If there's anything I didn't cover or anything you have questions about, please let me know. I'm more than happy to answer them. And if you feel like this video helped you out, I'd appreciate you helping me out by liking the video, subscribing, all the stuff you already know how to do. And until then, I will see you in the next video.